Hi, I'm Dr. Donna Lane.
And I'm Dr. David Lane.
We are continuing our discussion on the top 10 most important qualities for effective parenting. And tonight we're going to talk about one of the crucial elements of being effective parents, and that's consistency. Now, what do we mean by consistency? Consistency has several elements that are part of its nature. Um, the first is being consistent between parents, meaning that if mom speaks something, then dad would speak the same thing. Or if dad sets a limit, then mom agrees and follows through with the limit. So it has to do with unity between the parents. And what that provides for the child is a sense of safety and security, an understanding that they know what to expect, and it prevents them from learning such maladaptive behavior as manipulation, lying, playing mom against dad or dad against mom. Um, those kinds of behaviors that are very unproductive and unhelpful for them. But if there's inconsistency in the household, if the parents are in disagreement, then the kids are going to, any kid worth his salt is going to play mom against dad and dad against mom. Going to go in and ask dad, can I go? And then dad says no. And then they're going to run to mom and say, can I go? And mom's going to say, sure, honey. And then, the trust in the home is completely undermined by that. They don't know what to expect. They don't know who to rely on. And there isn't that sense of security. So that kind of union between the parents is very important.
And what's at stake here is what we learn in our family of origin is what we take forward in life. Our family is the base from which we launch out into the world to go have other relationships, to go start our own family, to do all of those things. And so if I'm learning maladaptive behaviors like lying and manipulation and playing both ends against the middle or one against the other, then that's what I take forward in life. And how does one have successful relationships if they're constantly manipulating their partner and they're constantly doing things behind the back? They're not being completely honest. They're omitting things. They're playing both ends against the middle, all of those things, which is what they brought forward with them. So it's very, very important for the parents to be on the same page with mom saying, what did your dad say when you asked him that question? And the child, he said no. And the mom said, well, then I guess that means no. And vice versa. The dad saying, what did mom say when you ask her? Well, mom said no. Okay, well, then that's what that means. That means no then. Now, I don't have to necessarily agree with it. We don't have to agree in that moment. But I do have to support the mom, or she has to support me. Then we go later and close the door and say, well, I don't really think it would have been a problem. I would have said yes, but you'd already said no. And therefore, I went with no, of course, just to be consistent and make sure that we're speaking with one voice. But I had some thoughts that I would like to share with you, and we can talk about that. And so next time we can do it differently. Or we could even come out and say to the child, me and mom talked about it, and we think that it would be okay for you to do that or go this thing. We just want you to know that we do listen to you and we do take into consideration what it is that you say.
I believe that one of the really great habits that you can form as a couple is being sure, well, two things really. Being sure that you have conversations ahead of time. Like David and I had conversations before we were married. Now we knew we were going to be married, but we had conversations before we were married about what are our values? What are the things that we think are important in child rearing? What kinds of intervention strategies do we want to use? And we got on the same page before we ever had a child.
How are we going to discipline?
Right.
What kind of methods are we going to use to discipline? Do we believe in corporal punishment? Do we not believe in corporal punishment? All of those conversations before we even got married, much less before we started planning to have children.
So I think having those conversations is a really great habit for parents to use, and consistently meet with each other to talk about those questions. And it needs to be updated all the time, because as we talked about when David talked about their developmental changes, as they get older, you alter how you set your limits. You give them more choices and more space in which to move. So you always have to be evaluating, how are we intervening, and let's stay on the same page at all times. It's that important that you would want to have that conversation on an ongoing basis. The second really good habit is to always say to the kids, I will go check with your mom or dad. I will go check with the other parent and let you know. So before you answer, say, I will go check, and then you go check. And then y'all are automatically on the same page, because you've already talked about what your stance is going to be before you present it to the children. So I think that's the best way to do it, if that's at all possible. Now, I'm aware that in situations where parents are not living together, then that becomes more difficult. It's still incredibly important. And if you are having difficulty with communication between your former spouse, and the two of y'all can't get on the same page, then get some help, get some outside help, rather than allowing the children to suffer the consequences of your inability to work out your problems. Get some help with specifically, how are we going to co-parent?
The absolute worst thing you can do, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
The absolute worst thing you can do is have the kids in the middle between your struggle. You're still struggling over stuff that caused problems in the marriage to begin with, and now your kids are just the pawn in the middle. No, that's not to be done. The child is an innocent bystander and needs to be treated as such, and the parents need to get their act together so that they can do what's necessary for the child's well-being and the child's benefit.
And you don't have to like each other. You don't have to want to live together. You don't have to have any of that stuff, but you do need to figure out how you're going to co-parent. And the best way to do that, if you can't figure it out between the two of you, is to get a family counselor, someone who is skilled at that kind of issue, and sit down with them and have them help you sort that out. And then you live by what you've agreed to. You come to an agreement and you live by it, and you do it consistently. I think those things are very important for the sake of your kids, for what they're learning about it.
Right. At the foundation of it, you both love the children, and you want the best for the children. And so get the child out of the middle, be consistent in your parenting, and quit putting the child in the position to sort out the struggles that y'all have had in the marriage for all this time. That goes for parents who are together as and not split up.
Right.
Everybody struggles from time to time in the marriage. Everybody fusses, everybody fights, has disagreements, etc. But you don't put the kids in the middle. You work that stuff out behind a closed door somewhere. Then you come out and you speak as one voice to the child, and have the child's security and basic needs and love of the child at your heart as your motives for how you deal with them.
Okay, another element of consistency is follow through. When you set a limit or a boundary, or whatever word you want to put on that, when you structure a child and set, this is what's going to happen if you continue in this behavior, kind of a limit, then follow through with what you have set. So let me use an example. I hear about this all the time. People do this all the time. They will say, okay, you argued with your sister about watching the TV, so we're gonna not watch TV for the next week. And then an hour later, the kid comes in and turns on the TV, and the parent ignores it and just doesn't do anything. And they sit there and watch TV. So what did that child learn from that interaction? First, they learned that you are not trustworthy. You don't do what you say you're going to do. And that's incredibly destructive. to any relationship. To undermine trust undermines the foundation of the relationship. The second thing they learn is it doesn't matter what you say, they can do what they want, and they just do it. They learn to be sneaky, and they learn to lie to you. So those are 4 things that I think is kind of obvious you don't want your children to learn. Another really consistently happening example is forgetting. The child has been their phone's been taken away, and I told them they could have their phone back on Friday, but I forgot all about that, and I told them to take the phone to school on Wednesday. Oh, well, no, you make a note or put a note on the refrigerator or something. If you can't remember what your limits are, which sometimes that can be hard, admittedly, write it down. Make a note. It's good for the kid even to see, get a whiteboard and stick it in the kitchen and write those, these are the limits for this week, so that you make sure that you follow through. A third really common error is you set a limit on the child. Okay, you do that one more time, then you're going to lose the privilege to go outside, say. And the child does it one more time, and you say, okay, now I mean it. You're going to lose that privilege if you do it again. Okay, no. Once you say that's it, and you set the limit, then you follow through. That's it. Very related to that same approach is they say, you say, okay, that's it. You lost going outside. And they say, oh, no, I'll do it. I'll do it now. I'll do it.
You were supposed to give me more chances.
You give me more chances. Oh, that's not fair. And you go, oh, well, okay. I don't, in your head, you're going, I don't want him to be upset. Say, okay, well, if you'll do it, then I'll let you. What did they learn from that? They learned how to manipulate you with their emotions. They learned that you are not meaning what you say again. They learned that nothing is for sure. And believe it or not, kids really want to know that there's some stuff that's for sure. There's a grounding that comes from that. I walk in the door as a child and I know exactly what's happening, and I know exactly what to expect. I know mom and dad are going to be on the same page. I know that if they say something, they're going to do it. I know all these things already. So I don't test that limit or push those limits as much as, say, a child who has had inconsistent parenting. So that's some of the examples of mistakes that people make. I'm hoping that helps you to be able to prevent those mistakes.
Another one that's closely tied to that is don't set a limit that you're not prepared to follow through with. Right. We had a famous kind of legendary, one of those family stories, when our oldest was about 3, and we were eating at a restaurant, and he kept climbing up on the back of the chair. And we said, you need to sit down. It's not a good idea, and blah, blah, blah. And finally I said, if you climb back up the chair again, I'm going to take you out to sit in the car, and we won't be able to sit in the restaurant. And Donna leaned over and said, I don't know if I would have set that limit, but I'd set the limit. And so 90 seconds later, he's back climbing up the back of the chair. This time he turned the chair over. And I picked him up and said, okay, we'll go sit in the car. But then I had the consequence too of they had to pack up my meal, and I had to eat it cold, an hour later. And so, think about the limits that you're setting, and don't set one that you're not prepared to follow through with. And I had equal consequences to our oldest son, who had to leave the meal. We sat in the car, and he was not happy about having to sit in the car, wait on everybody, on my mama and his sister to finish eating. But we did it, and I learned something from that lesson too, just like he learned something from that lesson. I followed through, but it probably was not a limit I should have set to begin with.
Mm-hmm. The example that I remember most clearly, that was the most difficult for me, is again our oldest son. We call him our crash test dummy because we learned all of our mistakes on him.
He echoes that.
Yeah,
he agrees. Yeah.
Yeah. he was in third grade, and we always had the standing limit that they were responsible for letting us know if they needed any material for their homework. And he had a science project due that week, and he didn't tell us that he had a science project due, nor did he tell us what materials he needed until 8 o'clock at night on the night before it was due. And I said, "What did we tell you about telling us about the materials?" And he said, "I forgot." And I said, "I'm sorry. Then that seems like that's going to be a problem for you. How are you going to solve that problem?" Okay, so he starts wailing because he cared about his grades. He was really worried about that. And I said, "Whatever we have in the house, that's what you've got to work with." So he proceeded to go, looking everywhere in the house and pulling out everything, construction paper and everything he could find. And bless his heart, he's in the third grade and he's sitting at the kitchen table. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm sitting on the stairs. He doesn't know I'm sitting on the stairs, but I'm sitting on the stairs listening to him crying at the kitchen table. And I got to sit there and let him finish his project on his own because he's the one that set up that dynamic. What I taught him by that is you receive the consequences of your choices. I didn't intervene in any way. I didn't impose anything on him. I just let him experience the consequences of that choice. And I think I was crying more than he was.
How did you feel while you were enforcing that limit?
Yeah, I didn't enjoy that at all because he was clearly upset. And what he finished making was probably the worst project he made in his entire career in school. Honestly, it was really bad. But the lesson was more important than the project.
And the responsibility
Right.
to take care of what you are need to take care of was more important than the project and more important than the pain that Mama had sitting on the stairs,
Right.
listening to him.
So he learned from that. And I promise you that in his rest of his life in this house, and probably in his college life as well, he was responsible. He learned, I am responsible for myself and my choices, and he lived by that from then on, which I think was it was worth my tears, and it was worth his tears for him to learn that lesson. But the hard part for us as parents is allowing that painful lesson to be learned. So following through, making sure that if you set a limit, you were going to live by it, that you don't set limits frivolously, meaning that you have no intention of following through, and that they know if you do it consistently, they know that you will mean what you say. So then when you say, if you continue to do that behavior, you're going to have this consequence, it has teeth. It means something to them because they believe you. And that's a good foundation of trust. That's a good thing. So those are things that I think are important to consider. Now, there's something called intermittent reinforcement. And what that basically means, if you think about training an animal, or is the most commonly understood one, where you occasionally give a reinforcer. Not every time they do a behavior, but occasionally you give a reinforcer. That's the strongest reinforcer for any behavior. So if you are consistent most of the time, but every once in a while you back down, every once in a while you change what you said, every once in a while you alter or you don't follow through. If you do that intermittently enough, then the children will never learn that important lesson that you mean what you say, because they're waiting for that one time that they get away with it.
Well, did she really mean it this time?
Right. That's the question. And so I know that that's a high standard. I know that I'm saying you've got to really work at this. But the truth is, if you examine what we're talking about, the truth is that if you do the work, the hard work up front when they're really young and they learn that valuable lesson that you mean what you say, then it gets easier and easier and easier as they get older. I've told David, and he agrees, that the majority of our parenting work was done by the time our kids were 9 years old. They already knew how to make good choices. They already knew how to set their own consequences. They understood that they were responsible for their actions and themselves. And we were kind of just like sat back and said, well, how do y'all want to handle that? And they came up with the answers, and we kind of let them do that because they knew what to do. So we did the hard work up front. The consistency that we showed in how we parented them, both between the two of us and with what we said we were going to do, is what made that possible. So any more thoughts about this?
Nope, can't stress how important this is. Consistency. All the other lessons that we have given and are going to give are grow out of a good foundation of consistency. Whatever you do, however you think, how you problem solve, etc. You got to be consistent in it. You got to speak as one person, one voice, and be supportive of each other.
Mm-hmm. Remember that the foundation that you're building is a foundation of trust.
And a foundation for life.
That trust is what is the cornerstone of every relationship. So you will build good relationships if you have that foundation. And you're teaching them how to build good relationships as well.
Right.
All right. So we will see you next week with some more of our 10 most important effective parenting skills. See you then.